Hi, welcome to Quietly Thinking Out Loud. Lately, I've been thinking about the word healing. It is a word we hear often these days. People talk about healing from relationships, from loss, trauma, or healing from disappointment. And I found myself wondering, what does healing actually mean? Or perhaps more importantly, what has healing meant in my own life? I grew up in a family that practiced the Buddhist way of living. I'm not an expert, and I have never seen myself as someone qualified to teach Buddhism. But I was fortunate enough to observe it quietly through experience. And over time, I came to understand that Buddhism, at least in the way I experienced, it was never simply about belief. It was a how-to guide for living. It teaches us to observe, to experience life fully, to understand ourselves honestly. And some teachings we may understand intellectually when we first hear them, but only life itself teaches us what they truly mean. For example, impermanence. When we first hear the idea, it sounds simple enough. Everything changes, nothing stays forever. But words only carry so much meaning. It was only after losing people I love, family members, one by one over the past 10 years, that I truly understood what impermanence meant. Freedom from attachment is another one that we understand intellectually, but living it is not that simple. And life has a way of teaching us what words cannot, and perhaps healing begins there, not by escaping pain, but by understanding life more deeply. And when I was younger, I had to grow up faster than many of my friends. There were responsibilities I had to carry early in life. At the time, I remember feeling frustrated. And when people tried to comfort me, I listened, but quietly dismissed what they said. Because at the time, I believed my problems were unlike anyone else. And as human beings, our own struggles always feel bigger than others people's struggles, whether that is true or not. But over time, I learned something important. I'm not the center of the universe. Whatever happened to me has likely happened to countless others too. Different stories perhaps, but very similar human experiences underneath. Loss, fear, disappointment, uncertainty, trust misplaced, or mistakes. I think healing changed for me when I stopped asking why life was happening to me and began understanding that life simply unfolds through all of us. There was another lesson I learned when I was young. I used to play team sports. I remember a moment when I was afraid to face an opponent, unlike anything I had experienced before. And I felt overwhelmed. My coach called for a timeout, and he looked me directly in the eyes and said something I never forgot. Don't fear them. Do your thing. If we are going to lose, we are going to lose knowing we did our best. And I carried those words with me long after I left the court. From that moment on, winning and losing became natural to me. As long as I gave my best effort, I could accept the result. And if I made mistakes during the match, I learned from them and practiced to improve. But my teammates couldn't do that work for me. They could help me learn or practice or do better, but they couldn't do that work for me. And perhaps life works the same way. And over the years, I learned something else. No one can live our lives for us. No one can heal on our behalf. The people who love us may listen. They may care. They may offer comfort. And I have been fortunate enough to know such love in my life with the family. But at the end of the day, when life wounds us, we are the ones who must sit with it. I learned to listen to myself, to ask difficult questions, to face the fear of those feelings, and ask questions like, can I live with this? What am I feeling? What does this experience teach me? And perhaps most importantly, what do I do with this now? And when I was hurt, I didn't ask others to carry it for me. I sat quietly with what I was feeling. I thought about it. I allowed myself to feel honestly. And then I had to decide what to do next. Because no one can make peace on our behalf, peace is deeply personal. Life, of course, has never been a straight line. I have experienced many kinds of losses. I've made mistakes, trusted people who later disappointed me, made wrong choices, misjudged situations, like all human beings do. But over time, I learned that mistakes do not define self-worth. I learned that sometimes we make decisions with hope and trust our own judgment. And when reality later shows us that we were wrong, we often resist admitting it. We continue staying in situations that feel uncomfortable, simply because admitting we were wrong feels difficult. But part of understanding ourselves is learning humility, learning to say, I may have misjudged this. I may have been wrong. And I think that is all right, because mistakes are part of living fully. They do not define who we are. And over time, I learned what I wanted to keep and what I needed to let go of. Not every disappointment deserves permanent space in our minds. Not every painful experience needs to become part of our identity. And I think life becomes lighter that way. I also noticed how my definitions of happiness quietly changed. There was a time when I valued beautiful things, luxurious things, things that I work hard for. I understand how social environments work, but I noticed something interesting. The objects stay the same, but I change. Sometimes happiness comes from obtaining what we desire, but if happiness depends entirely on external things, how sustainable is that happiness? I value peace. Peace, I learn, begins much closer to home. And over the years, whenever life become difficult, I found myself returning to a few simple reminders. Believe in yourself, love yourself, know your value. You deserve happiness. Life taught me what those words truly mean. To believe in myself means trusting that I can face uncertainty. To love myself means listening honestly to what I feel. To know my value means understanding that mistakes do not define my worth. And to deserve happiness means recognizing that peace of mind begins within, not in what the world gives us. And perhaps healing for me is not about waiting to be rescued. It begins when I stop asking life to become easier and begin understanding myself deeply enough to live with life as it is, to accept, to learn, to let go, and perhaps to remember that no one can walk this inner journey for me. At the end of the day, we must become our own refuge, and perhaps life becomes lighter when we learn what deserves to stay with us and what deserves to be released. We are all carrying wounds we may never tell others about for reasons of our own. And perhaps the most important journey in life is learning how to understand ourselves deeply enough to make peace with what we carry. And perhaps one more thing, learns to forgive yourself too. As human beings, we make decisions based on what we know, what we feel, and what we understand at that particular moment in life. Sometimes we choose well. Sometimes we misjudge. Sometimes life teaches us something we could not see before. And perhaps part of growing is learning not to punish ourselves forever for simply being human. Well, thank you for being here with me today. And until next time, take care.